You need, you need that experimental, like you need to have that story that you work on and work on and work on as you're working on yourself as a person, as you're
Yes.
growing up and as you're developing your craft. Even if
Yes.
nobody ever sees that, you need that so bad.
Because the
But
best thing about writing is that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
The
I want to
best
hear.
thing about writing is that your writing grows as you grow as a person. So
Yes.
as you grow and improve, so does your writing. And I love that.
I have 3 short stories that are currently out and published. One I have self-published on Wattpad. It's under R.K. Fisher 93. The other 2 are in anthologies. I actually have one of the anthologies here. The Monster We Forgot, Volume 2 by Soteria Press. My book, or my short story, The Basement, is in here. It is a story about a ghost. And then the other one is also by the same publisher. That one is called What Monsters Do for Love. And the short story that I have in that is called Canary. And it is about a very, very, very screwed up teenage boy taking vengeance on his girlfriend, who wasn't really doing anything other than being a teenage girl. I mean, he takes this girl into a mine with the intent of tying her up and leaving her there and letting her die from the poisonous gas. Like, it's really, really, really dark.
I want to read that. I like dark things.
Yeah.
So
And I loved writing it. It was really, really fun. But like just where I'm at right now and the things that have happened and what we're dealing with in the world, like I don't think I can get into that headspace anytime soon. You know,
you want like something a little lighter and more upbeat, something that's kind of like a reprieve.
You know, everything I see is definitely as Ron's too, but I'm doing it from the perspective of a kind of goofy, means well, but is sort of learning what it means to actually be a person in the world. Very gay, young pirate.
So gay pirates. Yes, I love it.
Flying around in 18th century ships in space. Like, this is a very different kind of story that I had to write during this, talking about these dark things, but in a way that didn't make me actually want to jump off a cliff.
I gotcha.
It's a lot right now. There's a lot going on right now. And as far as creatives go, like it's totally, like I will just put it out there right now. Writers, if you had to stop working on what you were working on before this, because this is going on, I feel ya. I feel ya. And I don't know if your book is dead. I don't think it's dead, but you are totally allowed to just let it sit for a minute.
For a second and then come back to it when things aren't quite so dark, and it'll be a change of scenery.
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely.
Well, let's go ahead and get into the first question real quick. I just want to know what got you started writing in the first place. What was it that sparked your interest in this and started your path?
Mom, who was a children's librarian at the time, checked out, and there were no fantasy books. Like my mom had to scour to look for books on unicorns and dragons and princesses because that's what I wanted to read. And there just wasn't any yet. You have Harry Potter to thank for that. And she brought home Sorcerer's Stone and started reading it as a bedtime story. And so that, you know, I mean, I played Harry Potter games with my friends and I did potions and I was like, you know, so like my imagination was always there. And then more books started to come out when it's a freak success that was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone and then Chamber of Secrets, Azkaban, and go on. You know, I was devouring those. And then at 10, I wrote a story. So are you familiar with Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal at all? Do you know of that movie? Do you know
I saw The Dark Crystal on Netflix, and that's as much as I know about it.
So it's really good. It's really, really good. I highly recommend that you check out both the original 1982 movie and the series that Netflix did. Unfortunately, the series got canceled, but I think it's going to continue on in like graphic novel and novel form, which is pretty cool. Crossing mediums is a good thing. Definitely do that as an artist. But I wrote because it has like this dark, spooky narration. And so in the tone of that narration, as a 10-year-old in a little pink notebook, I wrote a story about these two races. I believe one was a unicorn and one was like a Pegasus race. And they were going after this like magical jewel, which is what the Dark Crystal it's in the name, is about. So, and then I wrote that and I handed it to my 4th grade teacher who loved me. And it was, 14 pages in my great big 10-year-old handwriting in this teeny tiny little pink notebook. And she loved it. And then that was actually the only thing my mother has ever read of mine, because I was a 10-year-old and it was cute. And my mom actually photocopied it, and it somehow ended up in the display case in the cafeteria of what would later become my high school.
Oh, wow.
She made photocopies of the little book and then typed up the words, because I was 10 and I wrote a whole short story as a 10-year-old. Like, that's not something that 10-year-olds usually do. Like, it had a solid beginning, middle, and it had a plot. Like, I mean, it was about unicorn and Pegasus as in the tone of the Dark Crystal, but I was 10. So that, and because I received such positive, like, I really think positive reinforcement of those kind of things as children is something that we miss a lot of times. It's why a lot of people, if they start writing really, really young, they'll often stop and then maybe pick it up again later as an adult, when they are either less affected by negativity or don't care about it as much or aren't around it as much, or have learned to maybe feed off of it and go, you know what, if you don't think I can do this, I'm going to prove you wrong. But I always had really, really positive reinforcement. So that was number 1. And then at 13, I started writing a fairy book because that was popular. Holly Black's Tithe books had just come out. Melissa Marr's Wicked Lovely books had just come out, alongside the Twilight books, by the way, which I was very against. I was sparkly unicorns. I'm going to go hang out with the fairies. Oh, yeah. No, everybody
I liked Twilight when it first came out, and then I realized that it was problematic. I was like, wait.
Yeah. It's definitely an evolution, depending. Everybody did. Those books were enormous. Right. But I was a teen librarian for a couple of years, and I can tell you right now that I can think of one time in the past 5 years where I had a teenager asking for the Twilight books. Like, those books have, considering what a huge freak success they were, they have and that sometimes happens too,
because readers are evolving. Like, as social issues evolve and as we start to become more aware of different people in
some of the most political books published in the past 10 years were published for children and young adults. Like, it's one of the reasons I gravitate to that genre, because for whatever reason, kids are and especially people who write from the perspective of kids are really, really able to ask the questions that maybe a lot of adults are asking, but they can ask it in a way that's blunt enough and to the point enough to make us go, actually, you know what? I think you have a point. And it's a good thing. Like, it's a really, really, really good thing. But there's a lot of tension between adults shouldn't be reading young adult and but I really think we all have a lot to learn from childhood and the things that happen in it, because it's how we're here now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was writing, I wrote a fairy story, and that carried from age 13 to 23. I stopped writing for a little bit in college, even though I was an English major, mostly because I was writing academic papers on Jane Eyre.
A little busy.
Yeah.
Takes up a lot of time.
And I also did not have positive reinforcement in college. Like, I went to college after, I grew up in a tough area. I went to a, pretty rough around the edges high school, but I had teachers who were like, you can be something if you just can get the hell out of here. And so they were really encouraging, and they always wanted to read my stuff. And I always had, glowing reviews on every paper, essay, short story, whatever I turned in. A lot of times I could go up to my teacher and be like, I don't actually like this project. Can I change it? And they were like, yeah, go ahead. I benefited from that a lot. And then in college, my professors were like, but the thing that really got me back into writing was I met my now husband when I was, how old am I now? I was 23. Trump had just it was 2017. Trump had just gotten elected. It was summer of 2017. So that was happening, and it was bad. It was really bad. And I was in library school to be a children's and teen librarian. And I specifically, I started library school the year he got elected, knowing I wanted to be that, especially for social justice and stuff reasons. And then that job became so much heavier because I was working mostly with inner city kids that were either Black or immigrants, and all of them poor. But I met my now husband, we started dating, I had put like on my online dating profile, like I was a writer and I had, this is something that I'd always identified as, but I wasn't actively writing at the time. And I was also really like, I met him and it's wonderful and he was great and we were connected and like, we moved in together pretty quickly and it was because our leases were up and it was like, well, we spend every day together anyway. Why don't we just, so like that
Give it a
was all
shot.
going really well. Yeah, that was all going really well. But at the same time, I was like in this horrible, anxious, depressed spiral. And it was awful. And I didn't even really know what was happening. And it wasn't that he fixed it. It's just that he gave me enough space and security for me to figure out what the hell was happening. And then as I was taking care of that, I started writing again. And that's when I wrote what is probably, it's the most complete, but it is the last draft of that book that I had been working on since I was 13. It's about 53,000 words long, the longest thing I'd written by that point. Most likely I will never touch it again. But it wasn't too long after that that I came up with another idea for the other novel that I was working on, that I actually was working on when the pandemic started, called Court of Owls. That's like a post-apocalyptic, people turn into animals, are trying to figure out what this world is that they're currently living in that has like all the ruins of the old world and stuff like that. And they're fighting over the technology that they don't fully understand.
That
and
sounds
of course
cool.
yeah. But it's, again, really, really dark. And I'm like, I don't think I can write a post-apocalyptic story in the middle of a pandemic when I feel like the apocalypse is happening. I'm a storyteller and I feel like crap when I'm not telling stories.
Yeah, and writing is very therapeutic. It's not just like a creative outlet can also help you explore more about yourself and work through your own issues through those of your characters.
Yes,
and
definitely.
it's almost associative because you are writing what you know. So when you're writing about these characters and putting them through situations, a lot of the times it's reflecting what's happening in your own life. And it gives you the opportunity to work through it without really having to face your own issues, or at least not seeing them as yours.
Not consciously. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's much easier to have your girl actually fighting a dragon when you're fighting the metaphorical dragon of your anxiety, your depression, your, what have you. So, but at the end of it, you feel better too. And it's like, oh, hey, look at that, Like, I mean, the main character of that story was she was a princess who did not want to be queen and was fighting it and fighting it and fighting it and fighting it. And it wasn't too long after I finished that I realized that I actually didn't want to be a children's and YA librarian. Definitely not at all related. And she didn't have $87,000 in debt to deal with. So there's that.
The best thing about writing for me personally, I can't stop. Like, I'll have times where like I don't have time to write, but it always like you, it makes me depressed. I'm like, I have no purpose in life. But
yeah, I had to make time.
Writing is something that I just can't stop doing. I'm always coming up with ideas. I'm always thinking of stories. So even if I'm not writing in front of my word processor, I'm still writing up here constantly. So I may as well put it down on paper.
I've got a note app in my phone that I'm constantly jotting ideas down. I have a little, when I could go out and do things like the rest of the world, I had a little notebook that I keep in I have two of them actually that I like scribble down ideas, and I read. So my husband's a baseball fan and we go to baseball games when we can do things like that. And I bring a book and I bring my notebook, and very often as I'm in the middle of reading a book, in the middle of a baseball game, I will get out my notebook and start jotting ideas down. Like, because it just doesn't stop.
It doesn't. It's constant ideas up here.
Yeah.
And I know you taught writing. So, I mean, how does teaching writing to other people influence how you approach your own work?
So I've done it. I want to do it more. That's actually one of the things that my artist friend and I are planning on doing when the webcomic is happening, to like bring in more fans and hopefully money. One of the Patreon tiers we want to establish is having like a sit down one-on-one with one of us once a month and have like your stuff, whatever it is, writing for me, art for her, like critiqued and, taught. And in the past, when I was a teen librarian, I would do like creative writing classes and stuff like that. And I was also teaching writing in college and in high school. And I think one of the things it makes you do, well, for one, I'm not going to lie, it sometimes makes you feel better about yourself, because A lot of people write, and it doesn't mean it's good. It does make you feel better about yourself sometimes. Not that they can't be good. It's just everybody's on a different level, and depending on what level you're at, when you're helping somebody that's below you, you feel better about yourself. Like,
I just think that it comes down to the fact of reminding you how far you've come, because you've made those same mistakes before, and now you're able to and now you know not to make those mistakes, and you can help somebody else avoid those mistakes now.
And it's definitely, going off of that, and it's definitely picking apart, like, okay, well, what are the things that I used to do that didn't work? And what are the things that I did that did work? And you're not me, so those things might not work for you, but what are the things I wish somebody had told me, back then? My biggest thing right now is how to take in writing advice. Because when I was trying to freelance, like, oh my God, my Pinterest just turned into, like, how to write a 100,000 word novel in 30 days. And like, I hate that shit.
How? That's impossible.
I hate that. Like, I was talking to one of the last formal creative writing lessons I did was when I was in libraries, and it was a few years ago now. Like I said, I would like to get back into it, but I was talking to these two girls about dialogue, and they were like, well, how, and it is really easy to make dialogue sound super fake or more formulaic, or, and I told them, write dialogue when you can no longer describe something. Like when you're done painting the scene, when you're done talking about what a character, like when you have nothing else to write, you put that quotation mark in there and you start actually listening to what's happening in that room with those people, listening to those voices, that now that you are no longer describing what you're seeing, you're now describing what you're hearing. And that 5 senses. Yeah, that's definitely something that, and they kind of stopped and they kind of tilted their head to the side and they were like, all right, you want to write your book, you have an idea, you have to write it, you have to screw up, you have to rewrite it.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. It's
the only way.
You're never going to get it right the first time, no matter how much planning you do, how much outlining you do, no matter how many character boards you do. You can know all the grammar and spelling and vocabulary in the freaking world. Your first draft is still not going to be the best is still not going to be what your final draft is going to be, because
and even your final draft might not be exactly what you pictured it. It has to. I mean, Neil Gaiman in his masterclass, which I've taken multiple times because I just like hearing him talk at me about things. It makes me feel better about the world. He said, like, sometimes something just has to be good enough.
Right.
It has to be good enough. Sometimes you can't achieve the perfection that is, there's a lot of things have to happen for things to go from here to your screen, right? There's going to be something lost, and there's going to be things that don't work as well as you thought they were going to work. So you just kind of have to tweak them enough so that they work enough and then move on. And I don't know, that's one of those things that, like, that's something that everybody wants me to teach them. And I don't know if I can teach that. I don't know if anybody can teach that. I think it's one of those things that you just have to decide on.
Right.
And see what other people say.
I have had so many ideas for the first draft of my book. And I went ahead and I wrote the whole thing. It was like 114,000 words or something crazy. My final draft is 135,000 and it's in editing right now. But the first draft looks
Are you an overwriter or an underwriter?
I'm an overwriter. It's so bad.
I will say I'm a chronic underwriter. It goes to both ways. There's no matter what you do, you're gonna have to look at that and go, oh fuck.
How to add and how to detract. It's like but the point that I was trying to make, that you were making, I was just playing off what you were saying, but when I was writing the final draft, I noticed some of my other ideas that I really liked in the first draft, I couldn't incorporate into my final draft anymore because these two ideas were going to conflict. I can't use both. So now I have to choose one. So I forget where I was going with it now. My brain just decided to stop error.
It's a decision that you as the author have to make.
Right.
And honestly, decisions are one of those things that is the hardest to make because only you alone, really, unless you're at the point where you are reworking a draft with an agent and an editor to be published, or you have deals lined up and you're writing books with those people. Like when, and, it's in the traditional publishing sense, and beta readers and all those things all work together, regardless of what form of traditional publishing. But you alone still have to go, okay, so what am I doing?
Right.
Like I have.
Every writer has their own process, is what's
Yes.
important to remember. I mean, we have pantsers, we have plotters, we have overwriters, we have underwriters.
Right. And that's one of those things that everybody wants to know. Well, like, will you tell me what it is that I am so that way I'll do it? And it's like, you just have to, going back to like, when you're writing, you're learning about yourself as a person.
Exactly.
You just have to learn that about yourself too.
Right.
And it's possible, like right now, I have been a pantser my whole life, but say 10 years down the road, maybe I discover for that specific book that I'm writing, an outline is something that I need, like it's every book, you learn how to write the book you're currently writing. And
Right.
even if you've written 100, you still might not know how to write the 101st. You have to figure it out.
Yeah. And I know that you had said earlier that some advice that you would give to like a writer is to just start writing. But what other advice would you give a writer struggling with where to start?
I think that is another one of those things where you have to think about, do I not know where to start, or am I second guessing myself? Because you've already started if you have an idea. If you have an idea, you're there. Like, you've started. You've begun the creative process. What steps you take next will determine. But if you have an idea, you've started. Like, and now you just have to figure out what to do with it. Because odds are, if you're a writer, you have an anxious brain. Like, it's just, you don't always have to, like, those two things aren't always together, but like, it's
more often than not, there's something.
You do, yeah. And you have to think about, like, well, what's bothering me and why does it bother me?
Right.
And like,
this comes back to this thing about write what you know. Like, you hear that advice all over everywhere if you are looking up writing tips or something. And a lot of people are confused by it because they're like, well, I'm writing about werewolves and vampires, so I don't know anything about being a werewolf or a vampire, but they don't understand.
But you do know what it feels like to be an outsider. You know what it feels like to have your body change without you understanding. You know what it feels like to love somebody that you're not quite sure if they love you back.
It's drawing from the personal experiences, what's going on around you, this external stimuli. That's writing what you know. And I just wanted to piggyback off of what you were saying there, because it sounded exactly a lot of people, like that.
That's a big conversation right now. Like, right? Like we're this goes back to one of your later questions, and I don't mean to necessarily answer that right now, but like, the concept of a person writing about a person that is of another race. Like, how do we do that?
Let's talk about that now. I think that would be a great idea. The question,
my main character in this book that I'm working on right now, like, I picture her being like, in the world, her race doesn't really matter. There's some things about her skin that happens because people still suck. But I picture her being Latina. But I'm not writing her from the perspective of a Latina woman. I'm writing her from the perspective of a little white girl from Cleveland who is watching really, really horrible things happening in the world and going, holy shit, like, I'm writing her from the perspective of somebody who thought maybe these things are bad, but they don't necessarily affect her. And then she's learning that they actually do. And now she has to figure out what to do about them. And that's the whole book. She's confronted with something that she sort of suspected but had never fully grasped, and now she sees it. Now she can't ignore it, and it's a huge violation of everything she stands for as a person, but it's an enormous issue, and she's one person, and she's put in a position where she can work with other people to do something about it, or she can ignore it and continue actually benefiting the people who benefit from this huge wrong thing that's happening. And she has to decide what to do, and then she also has to figure out who she is. that's something that I think we can all relate to right now.
That's what I was going to say.
Like white, black, or like I will, you have to prepare, you will be ridiculed, you'll be all those things. Like as a white person, I cannot write a Latina experience. I cannot write a black experience. I cannot write The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I can't. Angie Thomas can write The Hate You Give because she grew up in, whichever part of Michigan she was in, that was an entirely Black community. She went to a white private school. She watched, people she knew get gunned down by police. Like, these are the things that she's seen and she knows, and she's writing about them. And it's a really loud, powerful, startling, upsetting, amazing, funny, sad book. I can't write that book. I don't need to write that book. She's writing that book. Like, we should let her write that book. We should also let her write as many other things as she wants. But
right.
I mean, we just have to figure out what our place is in the literary canon. Where are we in the conversation, and what can we personally add to it? In my book, there's parts where this character realizes, looks back on childhood memories and realize she had an accent. And I don't specifically say she had an accent. She had a Spanish accent. She grew up speaking Spanish. But I shy away from that specific. It's just she had an accent and she had to learn how to speak English the way her, insert European white father, unparenthesize, wanted her to speak. And she didn't even realize that was a problem until, now she's 19 and she goes, hey, wait a minute, like this is the kind of thing where, like, I know that happens. It's never happened to me, but I know what happens and I've watched it happen. And this is a problem. And I know enough about it to say, hey, this is a problem, but I don't know enough about it to really go deep into that and have a struggle with syllables. And, it's just a matter of what and how you do it. Yeah. All we can do as white writers, what we must do is we must continue to help our people of color, fellow writers and readers and allies and friends and strangers, complete strangers, people we don't know and might never, hold publishing companies accountable for continuing to favor a certain experience, a certain voice, making sure that it is diverse enough, and then also making sure that we are doing everything in our power to inspire as many different people as we can to write their own books. That's we can uplift, and we can hold accountable, and we can inspire. Like, I just sat in through Y'all West, which is a big young adult literature panel out in California. They had a virtual kind of free writing thing this summer. Yeah. The Queering It Up one was great because they talked about this idea of like where they saw their first gay character. And for a lot of them, it was Magnus in the City of Bones books. He's a side character. He's a fantastic side character with some wonderful one-liners. And he now has, I think he has his own series, and he had a collection of short stories that came out. But in the original trilogy, he was a side character. And he was the first openly gay character that these writers who are now writing gay characters who are gay themselves or identify as LGBTQ otherwise, like, see themselves for the first time. And they took that and they made something amazing out of it. One of them wrote a story about a kid in a conversion camp, and the camp is awful and horrible, and there's horrible, horrible things happening. But the kid, even though he's gay, is still white. So his experience in that camp is still very different from the other kids that are in that camp, who are, a lot of them are kids of color. So he has to learn, in this camp where they have to figure out how to escape because this is bad. He's also learning, like, hey, even though I'm like here, I'm still at a different level than them because I happen to be a white man. you know? So like, and that's something that I believe the writer, I can't remember if he is half Latino or if he was white or something, but it's very much still talking about privilege and understanding there's things I don't know still. Like, I know this story, but there's still lots of other things that my character has to learn in the story in order to make it full. And it's never going to be full. It's never going to be complete. It's just another piece of the puzzle that is the human experience, the Western literary canon, whatever you want to call it, that somebody else is going to look at and go, huh, you know what? I like this one character. I think I'm going to maybe write some fan fiction. And then the fan fiction is like, oh, hey, you know what? I think I'm actually going to do a spinoff of my own character. And the next thing you know, they're writing their own book.
I cannot tell you how many people I have on Twitter. Like, I have a male escort that I talk to for feedback for because I have a male escort in my book. He doesn't feature prominently until book 2, but he's my resource for that. Am I doing this right? If I make this happen in my book, this scene, is this going to be problematic? Is this offensive to you? And I get that feedback, and I do the same thing for it's a
great way to make friends. Readers. I will tell you what, it is a great way to make friends. You meet some really interesting people by needing sensitivity readers.
Absolutely. It's not a step you can skip. Another thing about writing, like I said before, like it helps us grow and improve. Like, as we grow and improve, our writing is going to grow and improve. But at the same time, writing can help us grow and improve as people as well.
It makes us confront the things that maybe we don't like as much about ourselves and turn it into something maybe that we learned from, maybe that we learn to manage, like accept and move on or change. It's all part of the package.
Absolutely. And so getting back to another question real quick, though, do you think that the struggle for diversity in traditional publishing is improving, or what do you think of the like what's going to happen in the next 5 years as far as becoming more inclusive traditionally?
So we need diverse books. That became a nonprofit organization in 2014. Really, it's transformed both the political and the publishing landscape in a lot of ways. I would not say that we are at the point where we have diverse books.
Right.
We have some of them. We need more. The fact that publishing companies have diversity quotas and they tell people, okay, you have already checked all of the diversity boxes, you can't do any more. Or we've already published X amount of diverse authors this year, we're good until next year. That actually happens. Yeah, that actually happens. That's a thing. You can be diverse.
No, you should have a minimum threshold. And there should be no cap. That's how that should work.
Well, it is a minimum threshold, but they don't feel like exceeding it. Yeah. This is a thing. This is a thing that happens. It's a thing.
And I shouldn't be this pissed off in an author interview.
I know. It's fine. It's infuriating. It's infuriating. I heard their name is Maddie, and they write for a traditional publisher. And they have been told, oh, well, my book is now too diverse. I have to scale it back. And because they've already met all their quotas. Yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing. This is why a lot of people do go to indie publishing.
Right.
I get it. I do. I actually think the landscape is really interesting right now because we're at this weird amorphous point where E.L. James sucks, but also so do the heads of the CEO of these great big publishing houses that think that they can buy out everybody and make all the money. And there's a lot of really interesting things happening in the indie publishing world, not just in book publishing, but if you look at the video game awards every year, the top 5 for best video game are at least 3 of them are indie games. Games that publishers turn down because it's too weird. So they kickstarted
Weird is awesome.
Yes. So they kickstarted it and got together a team of like 2 other people, and they made this absolutely amazing thing that like won all the awards and was like the best-selling game of the year. And like they still don't get it, but this happens. Webtoons is all independent publishing, and there are webcomics on there that give live action shows made off of them. Like they get 5 figures a month made off of just publishing a webcomic online. They get, they get manga and anime series published because of what they published online. Books, it's a little bit harder. I think it's because a book as a medium is just a more difficult thing to access. Like this is just heftier to get through than watching a movie, playing a video game, having that more visual aspect. Like just looking at this is it's just harder. So I think it's one of the reasons why it hasn't necessarily kicked off in the indie book world as it has with other places, but I think it will. Well, that being said, traditional publishing needs to not suck so much, because unfortunately, if you do want to make at least a little bit of money, odds are good that's where you do it. And you do want more people than just your mom and your grandma and maybe your neighbors to read it. That's where you do it, because on average, it's not for everybody, but on average, most independently published books, you get 125 unique sales average. Like that's high. And that's like it, like, unfortunately your chances of being E.L. James are just as high as you becoming the next J.K. Rowling in the traditional publishing world. Like it just doesn't happen, unfortunately. Also, please don't be E.L. James. Please.
You keep talking about E.L. James and it sounds familiar, but
50 Shades of Grey. 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh,
she's
God.
the author who.
Never mind.
Yeah, just don't.
I picked up that book when I was 19 or 20. I don't remember how old I was, but I picked it up thinking it was going to be like Twilight, and I bought it, and I was reading it. It was
Twilight fan fiction. Does that count?
Holy shit!
Talk about somebody who needed sensitivity readers. Talk about somebody who needed sensitivity readers. That book
I know
is
the
so
BDSM
insulting.
community is furious.
They're so insulted. It's so insulting, and it also just advocates for rape and abuse. And
it doesn't seem like a very healthy romance.
No, it's not. It's really not. Again, talk about the need for sensitivity readers, research, like any of those things. Common sense. I don't know.
To double back a little bit about indie publishing and traditional publishing, what I really like that you had mentioned about indie publishing is that they are creating more of a platform for more diverse works. And, it is indie publishing gives certain people who otherwise wouldn't be able to find books that represent who they are or what they're looking for. It provides the opportunity for them to obtain those books. So that's really, that's another great plus for indie publishing. But what I wanted to say about it is that with the traditional publishers sleeping on a lot of these diverse books because they've met their quota or whatever. And then people going on and publishing these books traditionally, and not traditionally, but independently, and them taking off and getting really popular.
Yeah,
that is going to be one of the reasons that indie publishing is going to change the climate for traditional publishers, because they're going to start.
It must, if they want to survive.
Right.
From a business decision,
they're going to start.
Stop checking these boxes and just do things.
Right. Because they're going to start noticing that they are sleeping on a lot of money, because there is a market for this stuff. You're just afraid to take a risk and start publishing more of these and seeing what'll happen. So
these books are needed, but and some of them do have a great big hefty price tag attached to them, like the ones you were talking about, who, they get slept on by publishers, they get an agent, they do all these things, but it just never fully makes it in the door, and they publish the book anyway, and it is a phenomenal success, and the publisher going, think of the famous story of J.K. Rowling. Now, I mean, this is laughable because 12 is still a small amount, but J.K. Rowling got turned down by 12 publishers before Sorcerer's Stone. You don't think those guys are still losing sleep over the amount of money they lost?
I love that.
20-something years later? Yes. Yes, they are. Now, 12 publishers getting turned. I'm like, most people are like, I got turned down by like 150 by the time I got my book published. Are you kidding? It's really, you know, one of the things, one of the wars that happen between traditional publishing and independent publishing is like, well, you can independently publish your book on Amazon, but so is everybody and their grandma, and nobody's going to read it.
Unless you are a phenomenal marketer.
And then the other side is, well, everybody's trying to get traditionally published, and the only way you can do that is to get an agent, and maybe your agent doesn't even decide, you know, like no matter what you do, you can't necessarily control the number of people who read your books.
It's still going to be difficult. Whichever path you choose, it's still going to be difficult.
It's still going to be really difficult, and you're still going to have to figure out, like, one of the things they say about independent publishing is that you make more money per sale, but how many books are you actually selling? Depending on what you're writing for.
You have 100%, but if you have 100% of nothing.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I think me and you too, like, as kind of mainstream sci-fi fantasy authors, like, we're writing LGBTQ characters, but we know we're reading traditionally published books that focus on a lot of the things that we're writing on. Like, we know there's a market. It's just going to be a matter of making sure our book gets in the right hands at the right time at the right place, so that way it can go somewhere.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of books, though, that are much more different. And like I said, my friend who writes the equestrian romances, I keep not wanting to say that because it sounds like it's a furry book. It's not a furry book. Furry books are another thing. Furries, oh my God. Webtoons is full of furries that make a lot of money. And I know somebody who works, she's full-time as an artist, drawing self-portraits of people in their furry suits.
That's like, awesome.
It's awesome. Those people make a lot of money. Those are not going to be the books and things that traditional publishers are going to publish. But they make a lot of money. Like, they're looking for them. It's there. It's good. You don't need to worry about independent, you know, traditional publishing if you're writing a furry book.
Yeah, because there's a market.
Or making a furry game or anything. There's a market. It's there. They're going to find you.
Right.
The hashtag is well populated. You probably already know a lot of them anyway. They're all over top of each other. Like, you're good. You're good. With romance authors, like even just traditional romance authors, you can probably, if you're a halfway decent writer and you know some people that are also romance authors, especially if you're part of like online book groups and stuff like that. Oh my God, romance authors.
Romance never dies. It's like the genre that just lives forever.
Just, I mean, and like, again, speaking from somebody who used to work in a public library, I can tell you for a fact that people who read romance check out a stack of romance novels this big.
Voracious readers.
Every time. And they're always looking for something new because they've read everything. You're good. I don't think you necessarily need to be a traditionally published writer to write romance and not only do well, but maybe even make a killing.
The last question, I think the only thing that we didn't touch on is what is going on with Simon & Schuster and PRH, and what does this mean for traditional publishing? I know personally from like a little bit that I've read that it's affecting writers' advances in a new way. Like, instead of them giving you the advance up front, like just all in one payment, they're spreading it out over however long.
They don't know for sure yet because the deal has not been cemented.
Okay.
For those who are watching who don't know what the hell we're talking about, on November 25th of 2020, it was announced that Penguin Random House, which is already a conglomeration of two publishing houses that were previously Penguin Publishing and Random House Publishing, and I believe one of them just consumed the other. Can't remember which one which because their names are all together now. That was back in 2013. So they're originally the big 5 publishers, and now there are 4. And if this deal goes through, which there's a chance it might not, it all depends on what happens with the courts, if somebody's going to fight it. And a lot of people were really upset about it, like really upset. It was for, I believe the deal is like $2.87 billion in cash or $1 million, some obscene amount of money that I don't even know how to fathom. When it gets up that high, billion, million, I'm like, whatever, that's all the same. But it's an obscene amount of money that supposedly is like cash. Like, I'm talking like suitcases of cash that are being like handed over a table. So that's shady enough as it is, right? But what people are very scared of is that when you have, now the other caveat is that there are lots of smaller to medium, even medium large publishing houses that authors use and are able to make full time and reach their people and publish the books they want to publish and meet the people they want to meet. Like, you don't have to be published by what might soon be the big three to do really well. Again, especially depending on what you write. Like, everybody wants to get published by Simon and Schuster, Penguin Random House, and whatever the other two are. I can't even remember. But like, you don't need to. It's not like, just don't. Like, it's hard enough to get published as it is. Like, don't turn down a deal because you don't recognize the name. Your cash advance might not be, 6 figures, but it could be 5. And you could also get an extra royalty check and a 6 book deal. That would be great. I will take that, and maybe every book you sell after that is also 5 figures and you're good, like might take you a little while, but like there's stuff going on. But the fear is that with mainstream, like very, very mainstream, these big 4 publishers, possibly soon to be 3, are eating each other. It takes away from the variety of books that are being published. That's hard. Like, I understand that fear and that argument, and it's definitely my knee-jerk reaction as well, and I think that's something that needs to be talked about. But these great big huge publishers were only publishing a certain kind of book anyway, and like, them narrowing their scope is bad, but their scope is already pretty narrow to begin with. So we should be disgusted and against this monopoly that's happening in the publishing world, and against any idea of any kind of censorship or controlled, marketing of books, and who writes books and when they get written and how much they get paid and what they're about. Like, that should not be anything that's happening right now. And it is. And that's one of the fears of the authors. Like, not only is it could screw up their advances, because either Simon and Schuster or Penguin Random House, I can't remember which one, does something weird with their cash advances for authors. They also have a tendency to do things like just dissolve total, oh shoot, I can't remember what they're called. They're like little subsects. They're like all the little publishing houses that specialize in certain genres, and they get absorbed into the big guys, and they can sometimes just be like, oh, we don't want to publish these books anymore. No matter how fruitful they happen to be, they just don't want to do it anymore. So those little publishing houses just get dissolved. And if you were signed with one of those little publishing houses, like as a YA author, because that publishing house specializes in YA, you are no longer writing for Penguin Random House or whoever it is that does it, because your publishing company that you were actually working with directly that was owned by these guys got eliminated for no other reason than like a business guy decided just to do it. Yeah.
That makes me unhappy.
Yes, it's very unhappy making. Very unhappy making.
Oh, wow. And see, and like that, I'm seeing like a kind of parallel between it, but this is a weird parallel to draw, but Facebook right now, where they're getting sued for like, having a monopoly and like underhanded practices, buying up people
for a long time. Amazon single-handedly put small businesses out of business forever, and they've been doing that forever. That's their goal. It's their job. It's what they want to do. They want you to only ever buy anything from Amazon ever. This has been happening since big tech has been in existence. It's bad.
Right. But I'm just seeing that that's happening with Zuckerberg right now and Facebook and everything, where he's actually getting sued for these underhanded business practices of buying up the competition or potential competition. And then you have over here Simon and Schuster and Penguin Random House doing basically the same thing, but there's not a court thing open or whatever. You know what I mean? So that's what
let's hope that those things carry over and that this is at least delayed, if not totally thrown off the table.
Yeah.
Because monopolies are illegal. I'm pretty sure Mary Trump made millions of dollars off of her book. I'm sure Obama made millions of dollars off of, his
you have a huge platform.
Yeah. And they're also, they're really important people, and even people who don't read books are going to buy those
because they recognize the name, branding.
And they want to know what's happening in the world. They want to hear, like these publishing houses. That's the other thing too. you don't need to be published by the same publishing house that publishes books by presidents and former presidents. You just don't. It's okay.
Because it wasn't even that publishing house that made them famous anyway.
Right.
It's not, right. They didn't bring the
They just happened to go to that
audience.
one because that was the biggest one that would have the biggest marketing campaign.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, because they could afford to do it and it's their name and they didn't have to get approved or anything like that, you know? So that reasoning is why Penguin Random House decided to try to buy Simon & Schuster. The downscale, editors losing their jobs, agents possibly losing their jobs, authors either not getting paid or having book deals canceled, books that very well could have been published a year ago suddenly not being able to be published because these 3 guys have control over every book that gets published ever. Problem. Luckily, there are, you know, smaller publishing houses, like Tor is another one. V.E. Schwab writes for them. Ashley Poston writes for them. That's one that I would like to eventually pitch to. They're, you know, they have a huge sci-fi fantasy, you know, following. They have a huge, you know, that's what they do. That's what they focus in, and their books are really good. But I would not put them up at like, you know, Simon & Schuster level, but V.E. Schwab, who I just mentioned, just signed a book, or heard the book that just came out for her, New York Times bestseller. And her front check was 6 figures.
She's the one who wrote Vicious, Vengeance, and The Invisible Life of Anna Luria.
Yeah, that's the one.
I saw them on BookTube, but I haven't been able to read them.
They're very good. They're very good. I highly recommend. She's great too. There's just following her, like, because she's really open about the writing process, the publishing process. You know, she's really, really cool.
I'll make a note to follow her on Twitter.
And also, she's big on Instagram. She is great. I know, I'm not either. It's overwhelming, but she does Insta stories that. She shows pictures of her dogs. Like, I mean, she's really cool. I like her a lot. And she lives in Scotland. She moved to Scotland from Kentucky. So like sometimes she's like, look how pretty Scotland is. And I'm like, I would like to be in Scotland.
She was like, I'm rich, I'm out.
Yeah, bye. I mean, it took her 18 books to get a 6-figure book deal.
I didn't know she wrote 18. Mm-hmm. The only ones I'd heard was those 3. Those are the only 3 that I'd heard of from her.
3 are pretty big. Also, Vengeful had just come out shortly after Secret Life of Addie LaRue. And Vicious was actually written about 8 years ago.
I didn't know that. It just got popular, probably because the sequel came out.
Because the sequel came out and the publishing house was more behind it because she had been publishing other books that had seen a lot of success. Like, she's been in publishing. I think she started writing and publishing when she was like 23.
Oh,
and,
wow.
I mean, her first, she's open about it. She's like, her first book deal, the advance check was $15,000. And it was enough for her to get an apartment and start writing and sell more books. You're not making a killing, but you can live, you know, it's possible.
Right.
You're not having the great big mansion, but you don't need to.
Exactly.
And also, her books are odd enough where I don't think the big guys would want to publish them even now because they're odd. Like, her first book, The Near Witch, is a weird little book. Like, I highly recommend reading it. It's still very good considering she wrote it, you know, when she was 21 or whatever. But it's a weird little book. And I don't think it would have gotten published at all now.
That's sad because weird books are the books. Those are the books that I just hit my.
Yeah. Those are definitely, you know, so again, like, you don't have to get published by the big 5, now 4, possibly 3, however, I don't even know, to do well, to find the readers you want, and to publish books. Like, you just don't. You have to do a lot of other things to make sure, but like, you don't have to wait for the 6-figure book deal from Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, whatever.
Because your success is going to build the longer you are doing this, the longer you are in the game, and the more you write.
you want people who care about your story and care about you.
Exactly.
That's
And not
something that I would say.
just the paycheck.
Right.
Because anytime anyone's into anything for just the money, it's never good. Like if you were in writing just for the money, your writing would not be good. It would be nothing but trend chasing. Like, oh, vampires are popular right now. I'm writing vampires. That's all it would be. And it would lack passion, and it would lack the creativity that you get from writers who write for love. Like, do we want to make money off of it? Absolutely. Because if we can make money off of our writing, then that's all we get to do. Right. We can just write from now on because our writing is paying the bills, keeping the lights on, helping us buy a new laptop. This is Rebecca Fisher. She's written for 17 years. She writes fantasy and sci-fi in the young adult and new adult category. And she's awesome. So follow her on Twitter at. So be sure to check that out. And until next time, guys, bye. If you made it all the way here, you're awesome. Head on over to lrevans.site and subscribe to my newsletter for updates about my upcoming novel, Rum World, British Rage and Gay Love. See you there. Bye.